Hello, Rodney. I think you're still connecting on audio.
Can you hear
Hello?
me?
I can indeed. How are you, sir?
Not too bad. It was good to see you the other Sunday.
Yeah, yes, very nice to meet you in person finally. Yeah. It's, Elaine was saying she didn't sort of picture me as anything apart from this. I think she thought it was strange that I had legs. But, I thought about it quite like that really, but I could see what she was what she meant.
Was that Elaine Spooner?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd never met her before, so it was weird to have a Spooner, two Clemenses, and a Marshall all in the same room.
But it doesn't happen very often.
No, well, and as I said at the launch, between them, it's probably about 1,000 TV episodes. It's quite nice that the next generation has retained an interest, etc.
It is, isn't it? It is that, because Elaine's watched quite a few of what I've done and probably the ones, the one that you and I did a while ago with jazz. So the fact there is this interest, I quite agree. You could very easily, dismiss it if you weren't, in that way inclined. So it is nice that they're kind of protecting that legacy.
Yeah, and it's good to see physical media continuing, with box sets coming out because streaming is okay, but often, streaming places will drop shows just like that. So one of my favorites, Peter Gunn, was out there and then it disappeared and then some of it came back. And really, having something on DVD or Blu-ray is the only way of guaranteeing that you've got it for sort of good, as it were.
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah. Has
Um,
is your 4K set arrived yet, or your Blu-ray set of the new Avengers?
yeah, no, I went for the Blu-ray because you've got to buy a 4K player.
Yeah, probably not
And
worth it just for the new Avengers, as much as we love it, but.
no, and also a lot of people have said to me that with older stuff, it actually highlights stuff sometimes that you don't want highlighted.
Mm.
So you can see the actor's makeup sometimes. And I think, there is a danger of revealing too much. I mean, a lot of those 60s shows, for example, use quite bad doubles. And of course,
Mhm.
all of these things show up a lot more.
Oh yeah.
But there we are.
And I think
It
also
is
with
what it.
I think since the Avengers DVDs came out, the 2011 versions, am I correct that they had a bit more picture sometimes? So that's why you sometimes see more booms than perhaps we remember, or is that just a bit of a myth?
No, it might well be the case. So I think, one of the problems, of course, is these shows weren't meant to be shown in the way that they are now being shown, if that makes sense. You'd have had a little black and white set or whatever. And I think some shows do really gain by Blu-ray. Others don't necessarily need it. So it depends on the show, I guess.
Hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. I think the original filmmakers would be horrified to think that we were watching it on these massive, or like we did, on the ninth, that exposing all the kind of things they wouldn't necessarily think they'd encounter back then. Um, um,
I think with the new Avengers episode that we watched, I think it was all to the good. I didn't see
oh,
anything there
mm,
where I thought, well, crikey, you don't want to see it like that, or and I didn't actually bring him up on the night. I should have done, but I mean that was Desmond Davis's only Avengers direction, and what a good job he did.
mm,
And of course, he started as a clapper boy at Riverside Studios. And there we are,
oh,
all those years later,
mm,
watching him where
mm,
it all began for him. But
mm.
no, I thought it was just great seeing it on a big screen like that.
Oh yeah, yes, it looks fantastic. Have you got your episode? Have you got the episode to hand, Rodney? You kind of.
I've got it on pause. Do you want me to press play?
Well, I'm just going to get mine to pause. So, just for those that are watching, thank you for for joining us. If you're going to watch the episode while we have our chat, I mean, obviously you can just listen because it'll be a fairly general chat anyway, but the best way is to watch the episode as we go. So if you just want to get the episode to hand and just pause on the opening titles, and then we'll all press play together. I'll do a little countdown and then we'll start. So just give people a moment or two to do that. I've still got the 2011 DVDs.
No, you haven't got the Blu-ray.
I should. Well, the main reason why I want to upgrade to the Blu-ray is because it's got all the Chichester Festival stuff on it, which I went to, and it would be a nostalgic thing for why I'd want to see it again. But frustratingly, most of the special features, I suppose, maybe because of for certain obvious reasons, most of them are created for this set, isn't it? So you've got this set, you've kind of got most of the stuff that's out there technically, but.
Yeah, I mean it does look better on the Blu-ray version. Uh, but that I think the standard DVD on the original Avengers is good as well. It's
Mm.
the Avengers was always more about the witty dialogue than it was about fabulous locations. It's sort of the opposite of the new Avengers in a way.
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah. And now, of course, the spoiled with the 4K New Avengers, people are now going to start saying we want 4K of the original. So
Well, I can't see that happening in a hurry.
no, no, but it does seem that they're starting out very the 4K. I mean, we've had the 4K on order for for a while, and the order got cancelled by Amazon because they couldn't fulfill it. So I know 4K is starting to come back in stock, but it seems that it's a good sign that there's still this interest.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean the downside, of course, is Amazon. I noticed has put the price of the Blu-ray up to what was the 4K.
Oh, have they? Oh, well,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, they tend to be a bit naughty sometimes like that, unfortunately.
but as you say, it's it's proof that people are still buying things in, I say, traditional but non-traditional formats.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll make a start. So I'll do a countdown from five, then we'll press play. So I've just got the Avengers quite tight on, not entirely revealed. So that's about a few sec a couple probably first couple seconds into the episode. So five, four, three, two, one, and play. So of course, it has some lovely music by Laurie Johnson, of course, the title music. But I think the music in this episode is particularly very effective, especially on the location bits and pieces.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of location, this is the most location heavy of all the 60s Avengers episodes. And so that they put the shooting deliberately in the summer. So this is June 1965. And they did two of my dad's episodes back to back, this one and The Hour That Never Was, which is also location heavy at the sort of air base. And on this one, we've got Roy Ward Baker directing, who'd worked for the likes of Alfred Hitchcock. And the teaser we've got is a sort of nod to Hitchcock with the sort of the scarecrow and all the birds. And it's quite a strange teaser in that you've got no human beings at all. It's just these birds, including obviously some stuffed ones, sort of and for anyone who's interested, the starting point for this episode was my dad reading what became a very famous book, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. It was a book that came out in the 60s, which looked at the huge damage done to our ecosystem by all the pesticides, DDTs, that were being used by the American pharmaceutical companies. And she pointed out not only was it damaging nature, but of course, because it was being sprayed on crops, it's going back into the human food chain. And so Silent Dust was partly based, as I say, on Silent Spring. And we've got, I think I sent you earlier a lovely color photo of this scene.
You did, yeah.
And it's a very popular color photo amongst Avengers fans because you've got this lovely public. Well, publicity shot of Diana and Pat having a break after shooting this scene. And it shows the chemistry between the two actors because they got on so well. I don't remember Emma Peel ever wearing that top again with the sort of the E on it.
Yeah, I don't think she does actually. Yeah.
So whether that was a one-off for this episode or not. And of course, it's a nice little touch that at the beginning of the scene, you don't know that it's Emma Peel having to do all the hard work while Steve just sits there relaxing, which is a sort of typical Avengers moment, which you probably wouldn't get in any other show because basically Emma Peel does most of the hard work in every episode, whether it's the fighting or the undercover work. And Steve, almost does use his sort of female Avengers as sort of lackeys, doesn't he, a little bit, in a
Yeah.
sort of gentle, in a gentle way.
And I love that line with the wine. He says, "I love a wine that fights back." I thought that's
Yes.
I must use that in real life sometime.
Yes, considering the fact that my dad was not a big drinker, drink plays a huge part in most of his Avengers episodes.
Yeah.
So in Dial a Deadly Number, it's all about wine tasting. And in The Danger Makers, when he's undercover, his code name is Bacchus. And here we've got Aubrey Morris playing the sort of the bird watcher. And Aubrey Morris appears in so many 60s shows where he's playing quirky, often rather shifty characters. And of course, in Avengerland, if you've got a little man with glasses, you know he's going to die. It's just sort of guaranteed he's going to be like a fall guy.
And would your dad ever write with particular people in mind in terms of guest stars, or was it that was not his department, I suppose? But
No, he did sometimes. Not in the case of this episode, but he had Harold Pinter in mind as the tramp in The Hour That Never Was, the following episode. And he wanted Kenneth Williams in one of his episodes, Room Without a View. And he went to see Kenneth Williams, and Kenneth Williams decided the part wasn't big enough for him, so he didn't get him. But, I mean, in the 60s, you had certain actors in the Spotlight magazines who you knew would be perfect. So Aubrey Morris here is perfect as a sort of little bird watcher. You needed an actor who's a lot shorter than Diana Riggs so that Emma Peel can sort of stand over him. And coming up, obviously, we've got William Franklin, who plays the sort of the squire, and he's always perfect to play those sort of urbane villains. And of course, here we've got Conrad Phillips. He plays Mellors, the gamekeeper, and Dad had already worked with him on William Tell, which was one of those sort of ITC swashbucklers. So even though that Conrad Phillips's part is quite a small one here, you've still got major actors playing these little roles.
well, I think that's that partly why these shows are so timeless. Is you have really good actors playing, even the smaller parts. You've got great character actors that you know is a hallmark, I think, of the British acting community, isn't it? Having really good sort of people that
Yeah,
not necessarily stars, but people that can kind of are interesting to look at.
yeah. The thing is, the Avengers by now is a huge part of 60s swinging pop culture. And so, actors wanted to be involved in it, even if it was a tiny part. This is a show that the Beatles would watch between performances. And so it wasn't hard to attract anyone really, well, apart from Kenneth Williams. My dad loved this character, who's played by Jack Watson, Juggins, good name for you've always got to have a henchman and it was Jack Watson in this case.
He's very good, isn't he?
Yeah, and there's a sort of earthy humour in the part, but at the same time, this is the Avengers where you've still got a sort of a nice balance between sort of light humour and dramatic tension, which sort of goes a little bit in colour, where it moves more towards sort of comic strip.
I love that the minister is in charge of the hockey team, which is a
Yeah.
lovely sort of quirk, and also the phone call coming across Patrick there. There's kind of wonderful Avengers touches.
Yeah, and the fact that he's far more worried about the hockey team than he is about the fact that, half the countryside might become wasteland. That's almost secondary to him.
But I think
Uh,
that's probably quite realistic of politicians. I think even to today, really, sort of focus on certain things and not worried about huge things.
yeah, I think it's probably spot on. I mean, often, truth comes out of humor, and they're off to see, a part of the country which has already been the victim of silent dust, and Dad called it Mandalay. And it's one of loads of literary references in Silent Dust, because obviously Mandalay is the home in Daphne
With
du Maurier's Rebecca,
Rebecca, yeah.
and we've already had a sort of a little quote from Macbeth, and of course Mellors is the name of the gardener in D.H. Lawrence's infamous novel Lady Chatterley. So there are loads of sort of little references sprinkled in, and
I love it that it's like putting bowling alley shoes on. It's that sort of
yeah, and it looks
90s.
like it's from an ice cream van, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Again, these are the sort of lovely little quirky things. Now, I haven't got the script to hand, so I don't know if my dad had scripted that he wanted that to look like a little ice cream van. That might have been Roy Ward Baker being imaginative. The episode wasn't originally called Silent Dust. In fact, even when they were filming it, it was called Strictly for the Worms, because in Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's book, she'd pointed out that these pesticides will kill off everything, maybe apart from the worms, and that there's an early warning system, as the minister says here, that all the birds disappear, hence Silent Spring and Silent Dust. Kudos to whoever pushed a little tree over, which is a nice little touch.
It is a good touch, isn't it? Got Charles Lloyd Peck here.
No, this isn't Charles Lloyd
Is it
Pack.
not Charles?
He comes up much later. Charles Lloyd Pack plays the guy who is sort of at the ministry coming up with new smelling pesticides.
So who's the one we're looking at now?
I knew you'd test me on this, and it's the one actor's name I didn't put down. Um, I'd have to check him. So this is Charles Lloyd Pack now.
Yes, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I think I'm
sorry.
slightly ahead of
Yeah,
you.
you're
Yes, I
probably a
was.
few seconds ahead of me.
Yeah,
My
yes. Yeah,
apologies.
that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, Charles Lloyd Pack, great actor, and often in slightly comic roles. If you've ever seen Strange Report, he plays a sort of semi-regular character in that, who's a mortician type. But yeah, sorry, you're probably a few seconds ahead of me.
I've done events for the episode of Randall Hopkirk that he was in, and also The Prisoner. So he's one of those faces like most of these people were talking about, seem to continually pop up in these kind of shows.
Yeah, I mean, Charles Lloyd Pack was in most 60s shows, always very, very good. And of course, the dad of Roger Lloyd Pack, who a lot of people would know. Um,
And Roger is incorrectly credited, I think, even today on IMDb as being in Town of No Return. The people for some reason have confused him with Jeffrey Keane. Um,
all right.
Nothing like each other, but even so, IMDb is not that reliable, is it? Sometimes.
No, well, it's like AI, it relies on human input, isn't it? And we're all
Mhm.
fallible.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a sort of typical scene that it's still driving the plot, but it's funny, and Steed adds his little bits about, oh, we can make bones smell meaty for dogs,
Mm.
and at the same time, this is the Avengers doing what it often did in the 60s, which is hinting that science and technology can be dangerous, that they're not always making the world better, that sometimes they're creating problems. And we've got another famous actress playing quite a small part here in Isabel Black,
Mhm.
who I think is sort of very good as the sort of Miss Prendergast, the sort of again, the sort of character who isn't necessarily necessary for the plot, but adds something to the story. And you've got these sort of fabulous sets for tiny scenes as well.
Yeah, it's all very well done, isn't it? So did your dad keep a lot of his scripts or
Yeah, he kept quite a lot of them. Uh, Sort of in up in the attic in a sort of big metal case. He'd sort of keep quite a lot of them, but you've got to bear in mind that, like Brian Clemens, like Dennis Spooner, Terry Nation, these are writers who all created 300 odd scripts, so a lot of them end up being thrown out.
oh yeah, yeah.
But no, I mean, Avengers scripts, they always came in two varieties. So there would be the camera script where all you've literally, well, you'd have the scripts where all you've got is the dialogue, and then you'd have the scripts that include hints to the director about camera movements, close-ups, and things like that. But no, William Franklin was great playing these sort of, as I say, urbane villains. A lot of people ask me over the years about the location for the pub. It wasn't
Mm.
actually a pub, it was just a house. And that inside, it's the same set that they use in the Manny to Surrey Green as well, where there's a pub scene.
Mm.
Diana Rigg looking stunning in a beret.
Oh yes, but she looks stunning in anything, doesn't she really? Um,
Well, the thing with the Avengers actresses is that they always look good when they're wearing sort of boyish clothes. So often you get Diana Rigg, she'll be Emma Peel as Robin Hood or Emma Peel as Oliver Twist. And it was the same with Honor Blackman. And it's the same with Purdy sometimes, that actually they look equally good when they're sort of almost dressed in a androgynous fashion. That was sort of how Pat McNee saw it.
mm.
And of course, we're setting up the fact that all the baddies, apart from William Franklin's one, they've all got reasons to be part of this plot. So, this one guy's roses, it's all been a failure.
Mm. That's
And,
a good scene. You sort of you see that anger and that disappointment in him,
yeah,
and it's very nice how they set up the tattoo to come back later. I think that's a nice
that's
little
very
plot.
good. I mean, that is scripted.
Mm. I think also when you're shooting day for night, you don't quite see it as much in black and white as you do in color. I don't think.
No, I mean, it's very true that black and white is very forgiving for artifice. So anything that isn't real can still look very good in black and white. As soon as you move into color, You know, that those sort of cellar steps, you can see they're made out of polystyrene or, you know, whatever the story might be. But no, I mean, it's quite iconic, that moment when he's being sort of strangled.
Mm.
I've no idea what color um, Diana Rigg's top was in this episode. I haven't seen a color image of it.
Mm.
Um, but of course, you know, by this point, they've got, you know, very well-known fashion designers creating all the stuff.
Mm. And if you look at other shows of this era to have this much location is quite rare. So was there a certain reason why they wanted to have the location? Was it just simply they had the budget and they could sort of do that?
But there were a number of reasons. Pat had said to Brian Clemens and to my dad for ages, I want an episode where I can ride a horse, because he was a very accomplished horse rider. Um, he also hated driving the vintage cars. So Dad gave him a ring one day and said, you know what, Pat, I've come up with an episode. You won't have to go anywhere near your vintage Bentley, and you get to ride a horse. And Dinah Rigg wasn't very confident. She'd hardly ever ridden. So she went away and had private riding lessons before making the episode. You know, that's the sort of person she was. Because obviously, when there's anything dangerous on a horse, you're going to have the stuntmen. But other than that, she wanted to be able to do as many of the riding sequences as she could. And of course, we still got the Steed from the Honor Blackman era, in that the very flirtatious Steed. And Dinah Rigg plays those sort of scenes brilliantly, where she's sort of looking aghast at his sort of chat up lines. All
Mm.
part of the fun.
Mm. So was the hunting element was it necessity of the fact they wanted a lot of horse um play in the episode, or was it did it come from something your dad was concerned with, or something that
Well, yeah, my dad was very, very anti-hunting. He wasn't a political animal, but he was very anti-hunting, and he thought, well, you're going to know these people are baddies as soon as they tell you how much they love fox hunting.
Mm.
And that's why he puts in a little quote later, an Oscar Wilde quote about, you know, the unspeakable, you know, hunting after the uneatable, or whatever it is.
Yeah, the unspeakable in the pursuit of the uneatable, I
That's
think it is.
right.
Yeah.
And they did use stock footage of a real fox hunt in there as well. And then we'll see later on there are hunt saboteurs, which seems quite modern for a
Mm.
sixth and quite unlike the Avengers, which didn't normally, you wouldn't normally get members of the public in Avengerland. I think that was a last minute thing. It's not scripted, the anti-hunt saboteurs.
I mean, certainly the eco, element of this episode is again seems very ahead of its time, just to say the anti-hunting is. So it's I think it's quite a sort of uh, almost bang up to date, isn't it? Really, in many respects.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those things that probably seemed ahead of their time in the Avengers or in a show like The Prisoner now suddenly seem very prescient. You know, even something like Philip Levine's Cybernauts episode, where you've got all the music being made by AI, as Dr. Armstrong tells Steed. And you think, well, crikey, well, that's happened now. You know, we've got music being generated by AI. And, you know, the whole worries about automation and, you know, is the human element being lost? You know, that hasn't lost any of its power. In fact, it's gone from being a bit outre or out there to now seeming, you know, yeah, spot on. So I think a lot of the writers in the 60s, they were probably half aware of the dangers that might come, but they've come anyway.
There's this lovely line, I think, is it Complex in the New Avengers, when this woman is showing Steve, the idea of this future building, or she's very excited about the technology, and she sort of says, "Well, when will it end?" Like she's sort of very excited about the possibilities of it, and Steve says, "Before it's too late, I hope."
Yeah.
And that's 77,
And of course, Complex is very much a recycling, really, of the house that Jack built.
Mm, yeah.
Um, the New Avengers was often recycling in an imaginative way, just as even, the Avengers in the 60s, when it moved on to film, um, yeah, it would often rework videotape episodes. I mean, you were asking about the location. Of course, one of the things is that a lot of the early Diana Rigg black and white episodes have been studio bound.
Mm.
Quite a few have no exteriors. But of course, as you're moving towards summertime, where even in England we'll get some decent weather, it makes absolute sense to use the most of 35mm film and get out there, to show off the English countryside. Whereas, if you're filming in November or December, it's a recipe for disaster. You want to be back at Elstree. A lot
And
of
ultimately
this is
on.
filmed around Radlett, the sort of the farm buildings,
Mm.
etc. Because obviously, although you go out on location, you don't want to be too far from Elstree, because it means that if the weather isn't great, you're not held up. You can go back and film some of the scenes made on sets.
And the boat scene in the beginning, is that close to the Avengers Bridge we see in
Yeah,
Charles?
it's literally around the corner. It's Tykes Water Lake, and that bridge, which you see in so many Avengers episodes, is the Tykes Water Lake Bridge.
Mm.
And they would often film tag scenes at the lake. There's an episode. Um, there's an episode. I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Small Game for Big Hunters, is it called? And that has a sort of tag scene where the two of them are in a boat, and that's at exactly the same location.
Mm. I like how he steals the apple. I thought that was it's like Bond in Thunderball.
Yes. Whether it's a good idea to eat an apple after you've been picking up
I
silent
did.
dust
I did think that, yes.
is
No,
another
possibly.
matter.
Yeah. Um, I'm not
I
sure
mean,
how
I'm
many episodes.
guessing that, for example, that this would be a set. I don't think they would have used any of those farm interiors. It's just too
Mm,
complicated.
mm. I'm just wondering how many episodes Steed's been shot. It's just because this is quite a dramatic sequence, really, isn't it?
Yes, no, absolutely.
Getting caught in the fox trap again, that's a nice little sort of um, little comment against hunting, isn't it, right there?
Yes, and I mean, even the fact that the baddie says, earlier on, he doesn't know anything about martlets. If you can't hunt, shoot, or fish them, he's not
Mm.
interested. It tells you all you need to know about the villain of the week, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, I mean, you can see even in black and white that obviously they had some good weather for the shooting.
Mm.
And as I say, this is the, advantage of shooting in June, July.
Mm.
But no, Pat was delighted when he was told, "Yeah, you're going to be able to do some horse riding." It was sort of right up his street.
Mm.
And the horse he rides in this episode, even though we haven't come to that yet, was the horse that Laurence Olivier had used in Henry V. The horse is now about 22, 23 years old, so it was a sort of veteran horse, but
Hmm.
apparently rode very well. Useless trivia, but there we are.
No, no, it's very interesting. I mean, you certainly see how good Patrick is on the horse later on. He's certainly got good, and Diana, doesn't disgrace herself. Even though she must have been quite nervous, even just you know,
I think the thing is that even though Diana Rigg, she was a very, very glamorous, feminine woman, she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. And
mm,
I think that's probably what worked really well because, ironically, Pat didn't particularly like having to do anything dangerous. He was quite happy for, the female Avengers to get involved in fight scenes or whatever else. I think riding a horse was probably as close to danger as Pat liked to get.
mm. Well, I think he was sort of saying this in the Avengers launch event that Patrick didn't mind being in the shadows a bit, whereas a lot of actors would like to be doing the Mrs. Peel role in terms of having some of the action, but Patrick was always quite sort of he didn't mind sharing the spotlight and perhaps even being a bit in the shadows.
Yeah, he was quite happy being in the shadows. I think I said, didn't I, at the launch event, that he was as close as a man can get to being a feminist. He
Mm,
was very much, he felt very guilty that when Diana joined the show, that she wasn't on equal pay with him, and he was someone who didn't see things as he didn't see him being the co-lead. Uh, Sorry, he did see himself as being the co-lead rather than being the star of the show. So for him, Honor, Diana, then Linda, they were on an equal footing as far as he was concerned,
mm,
which, yeah, would have been quite rare in the 60s. But then
mm,
he'd been brought up in a household to be like that. He'd been brought up by his mother, who was a lesbian, and her female lover. So he was, from that point of view, ahead of his time in terms of sort of gender politics.
mm.
Um, and again, I think that's one of the reasons the show works because I think the female co-leads felt really comfortable with him.
I just want to say I like the bat that comes flies past when Diana is
Yes, that's great. I mean, it looks like a real bat. I,
it,
I, I don't know if it was,
mm.
but it certainly looks like it.
I think I think if you look close, you might be able to see some wires, but to be honest,
Oh,
it
okay.
holds up very well. You wouldn't really know. And we get this very lovely sort of Western delirium that Steve's going through. I wonder where that came from your.
Well, of course, it's the same
Uh,
music that you get in Too Many Christmas Trees when Steed is having his dream sequences.
oh,
If you
yes,
remember
that's right.
that episode,
Mm,
and he's sort
yeah.
of wandering through almost magic roundabout trees, and Laurie Johnson's used the same here. I mean, it's quite a weird scene, this one,
Mm,
but it's quite fun. And again, you've almost got a reverse roles. You've got Diana Rigg as sort of, or Emma Peel as the sort of sheriff with her sort of her moustache, and Steed is sort of, the one who's relying on her, even though it's a dream.
mm,
But the Avengers by this point, it was happy to include like weird dream sequences and stuff. This is 1965. The 60s has started to swing and become a bit quirky. And, quite a lot of shows had episodes that were either completely dreams or had dream sequences. There's a episode the same year of Danger Man, the ubiquitous Mr. Lovegrove, and it turns out the whole episode has been John Drake's sort of subconscious mind. You know, 60s was happy to do these sort of things by this point, and presumably the audiences were happy with that as well.
There's an episode of The Prisoner, isn't it, I think, where Patrick McGoohan is sort of, it turns out he's telling a story to the children, I think, of the island or
Yeah, the
something.
girl who was death.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. As I say, you know, this is a time of experimentation in TV, and audiences seem to be happy with things that wouldn't happen in the real world.
But I think it's only when you watch other series like Ran Hopkirk or Adam Adamant Lives where you've kind of got, you know, the dynamic of the female co-lead is, or even sort of, you know, almost, you know, as we alluded to, Patrick being a bit in the background. That's not in the other shows of this era. So it's this kind of stands alone, doesn't it? The Avengers in terms of the role that women plays, I think. It's
Yeah.
very pioneering.
Yes, because if you do look at the other 60s shows, um, you don't get many where females are the genuine co-lead. And
Mm,
if they are, they hardly ever get involved in things like fight sequences.
mm,
So you've got something like Department S, yeah, where one of the three leads is a woman and she's a computer expert, but she doesn't get involved in any of the fisticuffs.
mm,
Whereas you know, a lot of people wrote to Diana Rigg at this time, a lot of women, and said that actually you're a role model because you've shown that, you know, women don't have to serve, you know, that women can actually be scientists, or they can kick ass, or whatever you want to call it. And I don't think you can overestimate the power of that for a young woman or an older woman at home, you know, watching the show. I mean,
mm,
it's not a show that's realistic or completely serious, but maybe that in a way made it easier for it to, you know, put over serious
mm,
issues. I mean, this episode, as I said at the beginning, you have got, it is taking a real life issue in terms of pesticides, and it's pointing at that, but in a way that still draws on humor. You know, it's not a
mm,
documentary.
mm. I
I
think
do
this is
love the scene here between the two of them.
I was just
It
going to
was a,
say that the loading of the guns and back and forth in between that urgency that there is what they're going to do when they've loaded. Yeah.
well, also the fact that Omrod says, you know, I bought this gun at a really expensive sort of store in London. And Steed says, yeah, I've got the one with the walnut handle. You know, I said,
Mhm.
I've got a better one than you.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Mm,
And there is that slightly, you know, men with their appendages, who's got a larger one type thing. There's
mhm.
always a little bit of sexual innuendo in a very light-hearted way.
Yeah.
But I think this is one of the things that Pat was so good at. You know, he's not an action man, but there's no one better at that sort of witty repartee and putting someone down.
Mm.
And he's not doing it with his fists. He's doing it through his wit.
Yeah, it's good, a good role model for us, isn't it? When people get on the nerves, wit rather than punching on the nose, which is what we probably would want to do. But
Well, I think Avengers writers always knew this is a show that revolves around sparkling dialogue. You know, there will be action sequences,
mm,
but it's not a show that was, I wouldn't put it in the sort of action series type genre. It's more sort of, as I said earlier, sort of nice balance between humor and a bit of dramatic tension. I've never actually seen this actress in anything else. She has had quite a good career, Joanna Wake, who plays Beryl
mm,
Snow. But I thought
mm,
she was quite good in this episode. She's sort of quite flirtatious with Steed, but she's equally disgusted whenever Juggins tries flirting with her. calling a snowdrop.
Yeah, she is very good, isn't she? So how long would it sort of take your dad to construct an episode like this? What was his kind of writing pace like?
It always depends on the production. So Brian and Dad had done some location hunting before this season started, and they wrote some episodes before production began. But of course, as soon as production is, as soon as the scripts are running out and production is almost caught up with the scripts that you've got in the can, as it were, then you don't have as long to do them. So ideally, Dad would take a month over a script. But as the, as I say, as production has caught up, you'd probably have to deliver one in a couple of weeks. And of course, there were things that were out of your control. So you might be told, well, look, Roger, we need a script, but actually Pat needs a holiday. So it's got to be mostly Diana or vice versa. So there are quite a few episodes in this season where you only get one of them at the beginning and the end. There's one that my dad did in this season called A Girl from Auntie. And Diane is hardly in it. She's kidnapped. Emma Peel's kidnapped at the beginning and put in a bird cage. And Liz Fraser takes over as the sort of the female co-lead for most of the episode. So sometimes, you were given a scenario where you've got to storyline around one of them not being there. Or, of course, occasionally you'd be told, well, actually, we've blown the budget on the last two. Can you write an episode that only involves a couple of sets, or, all sorts of things come into consideration. We do get, with the fight sequence coming up, we obviously get, and you can see it on the Blu-ray, you do intercut between Pat and Norman Bird, who he has a fight with, and the stunt doubles, one of which, of course, is Ray Austin, who went on to be a very good director, good director on the new Avengers, in America on shows like Magnum PI. A guy who had quite an incredible career. He was a double on North by Northwest, a Hitchcock film back in the day. So
I think there's very few people like Ray who go from being, a chauffeur, albeit for Cary Grant, to suddenly breaking America and directing some of the biggest shows of the time. It's quite a, you know, nothing that Ray didn't do, I don't think.
no, the thing is that a lot of those stunt coordinators and stunt men in the 60s, like Ray, and Frank Mayer is another one who worked with Pat McGowan, they were always being called upon to do more than just stunts. They'd always appear as like henchmen or some sort of villainary roles. They
That's the other
are
thing about,
almost the sorry.
I was going to say that's the other thing about Sid Child. She never did that. She never got any acting roles well, not in the Avengers anyway. She was always kind of whereas Ray and Paul Weston were kind of would turn up, wouldn't they?
Yes,
Uh,
no, that they would. I mean, obviously, at the beginning with Diana Rigg, her stunt doubles were often men. It's
mm,
only really in colour that you get someone like Sid Child coming in.
yeah. Didn't Ray knock himself out on this one? Is that correct? Some
Not what I'm aware of.
well, if he did the horse bit or something like that, we might
But
have
you may well be right.
I think I read that somewhere, but it might not be correct.
I mean, the Avengers was very lucky at this time because the
Well,
directors on the show are people like Roy Ward Baker and
Mm.
Charles Crichton, they all had film backgrounds, but
Mm.
because,
Yeah.
60s British cinema wasn't at a great point, partly because TV was popular,
Mm.
suddenly you've got these directors who are making, what are really something like Silent Dust. It's a 50-minute mini movie, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. One of the protesters, the lady, she looks a bit like Tina Simmons, but I don't think she is. No. I know Tina does pop up in a few Avengers and all sorts of things as an extra.
Well, as I say, all the protesters, that was sort of put in late on.
Mm.
And I know that originally, we haven't got to it yet, but when Steed knocks out Juggins with one of those signs, that was going to be a for sale sign. It wasn't going
Mm.
to be a protester sign. But these things, change. And as I say, I think they did a very good job cutting between the actual horse riding for this episode and a real fox hunt.
Mm.
I don't see any obvious sort of cutting between it.
No, it's pretty seamless, isn't it? And yeah, because he gets knocked out with the down with blood sports sign, isn't it?
Yes,
I think.
yeah.
But whether it would have been too on the nose for him to be knocked out with the down with violence side, I don't know if that would have been a bit beneath Roger to do that. But
Well, of course, the difference between the videotape era and the filmed era is that now, if you're a writer like Roger, you submit your script and you see nothing until it appears on TV. You don't even see the rushes. Whereas
mm,
obviously in the videotape era, he'd be there when they were doing a dress rehearsal and when they were recording it. It was a far more intimate setup then.
mm,
So if you were doing a dress rehearsal, Pat would often say to my dad, "Well, Roger, Steed wouldn't say that." And Roger would go, "Well, you tell us, Pat, what would Steed say?" Because obviously, Pat, by this point, by the filmed era, he's almost a co-creator of Steed. He knows Steed better than any of the writers do.
mm. I love how Mrs. Peel is treating this whole thing, but she's being stalked almost like a game. She's, there's not that sense of danger or,
No.
crapping at oneself that we would be doing in real life. It's kind of this, it's kind of, you don't really feel too, there's tension, yes, but you're kind of in on the joke, aren't you, I suppose?
Yeah.
Um,
And and no one is better than her at that sort of slightly wry look. It's almost a wry look to the camera
mm,
and to us, as if to say, well, really, it's going to end happily. It's
mm,
because, that's the show the Avengers was.
mm,
I've no
mm,
idea, in answer to the question that popped up, why
mm.
why Emma Peel has to take her boots off.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, I very much doubt that was scripted.
mm,
But then Pat and Diana did like doing things off the cuff as well. It was
yeah.
almost sort of like, why not?
Yeah, I sort of read it as it was kind of sort of maybe put them off the scent, thinking that she would
Yes, it
play with
might
it,
well be.
you know. But the delight she sort of does with the boots is very good. And there's a little bop she does on with a hat.
Well, those are the sort of little stylish touches that the,
Mm.
the actors would probably add themselves. I
Yeah.
very much doubt that Roy Ward Baker even said to her, "Oh, can you pat your bowler hat?" It was
Mm.
just those sort of fun little gestures.
Well, that's a job of the actor, isn't it, to bring those kind of touches to those roles. And it's only really, I think, when being cornered in with the tree and the whip that you kind of get a sense that they're not playing anymore.
Yes, no, absolutely. And my father was always surprised that that got through the censors because, of course, the Avengers had problems this season with whipping in the infamous episode Touch of Brimstone, where Peter Wyngarde whips
Mm.
Diana Riggs' character.
Well, I
And
suppose
that.
Yeah, I suppose
That
that
had,
got past. This is a bit tame, isn't it, by comparison? But you know,
well, there's actually probably more whipping in this. I think what it was in A Touch of Brimstone, it's quite clearly kinky.
yes, yeah.
Whereas because it's a kinky episode,
Mm.
whereas here it's more sadistic,
Mm.
and for whatever reason they had no problem with the censors on here. Probably the biggest problem was making sure that Diana Rigg didn't actually get hit by a whip.
Well, yeah. You can see Patrick enjoy himself on the horse.
Well, it is the ultimate. This is Steed, quite literally, isn't it? Steed with his steed, and
Mm.
he is like the knight errant arriving to sort of to save her type thing. And which sometimes you would get the other way around. So there are some episodes where obviously Mrs. Peel comes to his rescue. He's tied up in the Hidden Tiger, one of the colour episodes, and she comes and saves him. So it can sort of work both ways.
Mm. And with these end tags, were these always written by the writers of the episodes themselves, or were they kind of sometimes put in by others?
They were sometimes written by the writer himself, sometimes they were added. I mean, the one thing you were told was, if possible, try and fit it into the episode. So on The Hour That Never Was, they go away on a milk float. I mean, that was changed, so it was speeded up. That was a in-house decision. Obviously, on this episode, you've got quite an odd tag scene in that obviously the hot air balloon doesn't really have anything to do with
No.
the actual episode. But I guess the idea was they're in the countryside, so. And of course, the reason we have tag scenes was it was an extra commercial break for America. So in America, you could have a commercial break after the teaser, and then you could have one before the tag scene. And so there was a certain amount of pressure to have fun tag scenes because you want the audience to think, well, it's worth sticking around.
Mm.
Obviously, they became far more elaborate in color. I think far too elaborate. I
Right.
like these. And the writers were given the line that Steed and Mrs. Peel should drive off or ride off towards a bright horizon. That's what it was called. Um, so yeah, they're just fun little. It's a sort of happy ever after, isn't it?
Mm. What's the reason why Roger didn't do the last series, the Linda series? I suppose he was just busy with other things, I take it.
Well, no, I mean Brian and Roger, they didn't have a falling out, but they disagreed about the way the Avengers was going.
Mm.
My dad felt that it should always have one foot with a bit of dramatic tension in the real world and one
Mm.
foot in Avengerland. And Brian wanted to push the series further and further towards that sort of almost parody. So you've got episodes in color which the reference other shows like Department Air Silver Prisoner, or you've got Epic, which obviously is a parody of the Avengers itself. And so my dad had created a 60s show called Public Eye, and he decided to go back to sort of his own show. Um, I mean, that's he'd done 15 Avengers episodes. There's only a certain number of storylines that you can come up with without. And no, he felt that the Avengers had lost that balance in color between drama and light humor, and it sort of overbalanced. I mean, I think the charm of the Avengers is there is a season for everyone. Some
Yeah.
people, are just waiting for more Ian Hendry episodes to turn up because they like that sort of noirish sort of crime thriller. A lot of people love the Honor Blackman period. I personally think this season that we've just looked at an episode of Silent Dust. Um, I think that's about as good as it gets for me in Six's Avengers, because we've still got a bit of dramatic tension. It obviously looks better on 35mm film. Diana Rigg is at her freshest as Emma Peel. By the colour season, she's obviously looking ahead and thinking, you know, what else am I going to do, etc., etc. And you've got a lot of writers on this black and white season. The colour season is mostly Philip Levine and Brian. And I think they could have probably done with a few more writers, because the show is moving far more towards sci-fi, isn't it, in colour?
Yeah, look at episode like the Winged Avenger when you've got Batman references, and it's
Yeah.
very different to something like this, and it's more formulaic with the Mrs. Peel were needed, and there's lots of running gags, I suppose, because you've got fewer writers, they can sort of shape a season, can't they, more than so there's some benefits to that, but you haven't got this variation that you have in these black and white ones.
One of the things I remember my dad often saying was that obviously the arrival of Men from Uncle changed things quite a bit,
Mm.
because suddenly America is producing something that in some ways was quite like the Avengers. And of course, Man from Uncle was huge when it came to the UK. I mean, it was massive. If you ever look at any of the photos of the two actors arriving in Britain for publicity shoots, you've got thousands of people at the airport greeting them. You know, there's almost a Beatlemania about those actors. So the Avengers, by the late 60s, it's not on its own. You referenced Adamant Lives, which obviously was the BBC's attempt to do an Avengers, but of course with no money and not on film.
Yeah.
And Dad was asked to write the pilot for that.
Oh.
In fact, they offered him what at the time was a huge amount of money. They said, if you can write it in a week, we'll pay you £1,000, which was a lot in the mid 1960s.
Mm.
Normally, on an Avengers episode, you might get £250. But the fact that they wanted it in a week put Dad off, because in his mind he's thinking, well, you're not going to get anything really very good in a week. But I've still got the letter actually that Sidney Newman, who of course was part of the creation of the Avengers, and he'd written to Dad about Adamant Lives. And it's literally, if you can write it in a week, it's 1,000. If it's 2 weeks, it's 500. If it's a month, and it was like,
Mm.
but I still think the Avengers is unique in that sixes landscape, in terms of what it was doing. But it's one of those strange things, you lose and you gain when you move into color.
Mm.
You obviously, for things like Emma Peel fashions, it's great. So if you look at Epic, and she's got this pea green suit and it looks fabulous. But in terms of things like the tension, you haven't got that subtle lighting anymore. In the interiors in that farmhouse, it's wonderfully lit by the cameraman or the lighting director. In color, it tends to be just a flood of colors. So, any of those shows in the sixes, the Saint, Danger Man, the Avengers, Man from Uncle, they all move from black and white into color. And you tend to move more towards comic strip. And that's not putting the shows down. For a lot of people, that's their favorite period of those shows. But it's very hard to light subtly, and it becomes harder to create those dark shadows that like a henchman comes out of, or that scene you talked about earlier where Juggins's tattooed forearm comes round Quince's neck. That probably wouldn't have looked nearly as good in color.
Yeah.
But then you are talking to a bit of a black and white sort of old fart in me. It's sort of, I do like the art of black and white. shooting and lighting.
I mean, I agree that some of my favorite, I think my favorite Avengers, certainly of the Daniel Craig era, is the black and white season, and the black and white Doctor Who is probably some of the most interesting ones to me because you have, we say, the subtlety, the dimension that black and white brings. This sort of some of the things that you can do with it that you perhaps lose in color. And of course, when color comes along, everyone's so fascinated by it that's why airport walls are yellow in the Man from Uncle, or Brett Sinclair's apartment's blue. It's you wouldn't. There's certain it's like kids in a sweet shop, isn't it, with color when it first comes in. So it's not going to be, it's going to be comic booky, isn't it, as you say.
It is, and it often took people quite a while to acclimatize to making in color. And
Mm,
obviously, of course, the irony is these shows are still being shown in the UK in black and white because color won't come in on ITV
mm,
until, is it November 1959? Is that 69? I
mm,
think. Um, but Robert Banks Stewart, who worked on the Avengers, he worked on this season. He said that you lose some of the menace in color. And he says there's a tendency to just clarify everything. And I think what he meant by that is, as you just said, oh, let's have a bright yellow wall, or we'll have a bright blue one. But as I say, yeah, I mean, the color rig season is still the most popular among most fans. I just think that what we have, and Silent Dust is a good example, is we just have a little bit more subtlety and menace.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I think a lot more atmosphere, and you say it can be more sinister in black
Yes,
and white.
well, you lose that noir edge. And even though I wouldn't describe the Avengers as being noir in the same way that, let's say, Danger Man was, um, nevertheless, like one of Brian's episodes set in a department store, and you've got a real sense of menace in this empty department store. You're waiting for some villain to jump out from behind a teddy bear or a toy or something, and very hard to get that in color.
Mm. Oh
But
yeah. And did you ever meet Roy Baker, the director?
I never did, sadly. I mean, Dad did work with him again. They did a horror film in the 70s with Peter Cushing and Ian Ogilvy called and Now the Screaming Starts. So they did work together again. But um, no, I never met him. No, I mean, believe it or not, I wasn't alive when Silent Dust was made.
Well, I mean, yes, yeah.
Um, so I got to know some of the directors like Don Lever, who directed Dial a Deadly Number, because he was still working with Dad in the 1990s on like Lovejoy.
Mm,
But no, as I say, to have a director like Roy Wood Baker, you're just so lucky because even that lovely image early on where Diana Rigg is holding up Quince's glasses and you get her own reflection in the glasses,
mm,
that's art.
yeah.
And that was all learned on the videotape era by the Avengers directors back then, because obviously you're in a tiny studio and you need to use things like mirrors or wine glasses to shoot through because you haven't got location. And yet, when the Avengers did go out on location, you have still got that stylish direction. So you've got Steed having had his top of his hat cut off, and then he looks through the villain looks through it at the villain. Those sort of little touches are great. And those are the sort of touches you don't get as often on the other shows, because that is part of the Avengers. It's, as I say, shooting through mirrors, wine glasses, hats, whatever it might be. It's just
Mm.
fun. You don't need to do it, but it's part of the style, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We had a nice comment that said about the black and white episodes with Honor and Diana that they seem written more they're more character driven and more subtle, more sophistication, and they seem to be aimed at more of a adult audience, which I think is a
Yes.
good
Yeah.
comment.
I mean, again, it's always dangerous to generalize, but I would say that as the 60s TV developed, and particularly the move into color, there is a move away from more adult and subtle content towards something closer to Batman that you referenced earlier. Um, and there are obviously exceptions to that. The Prisoner would be an exception. But I think a lot of his shows did move far more towards it's a slight dumbing down of storylines, etc. So in that Silent Dust episode, you got references to Shakespeare, D.H. Lawrence, Oscar Wilde, Daphne du Maurier. That you don't get any of that once the show moves into color. It's far more, let's just say, comic strip isn't meant as a criticism at all. I like comic strip, but you're not going to get subtleties, and you're not going to get the visual subtlety that black and white brings you. You know, you look at any of those sort of noir TV images, and you've got wonderful use of shadows and lighting, and you know, it's an art form.
Mm. I know that Honor and Patrick were very keen to get the Avengers on film, obviously when they were doing that that their series. So why did it take that this long to go to film? Do you know?
Well, I mean, this is being made by ABC, as in British ABC. And whereas Lou Grade's ITC shot everything on 35mm film,
Mm.
ABC shot all of its shows on videotape. So you've got Dad's Public Eye, you've got Callan, which is about to come along with Edward Woodward, and the Avengers, and they're all shot on videotape. And it would have only been once there was a hint that maybe there's an American market for the Avengers. That's why the Avengers went on to film. It was
Mm.
to sell into America because, I mean, Lou Grade would have never made shows on film unless he could have sold them to America. That was the idea because America wouldn't buy videotape stuff.
Mm.
I think the sad thing is that obviously, if you go back and watch the Honor Blackman episodes, they do look crude because they're made on videotape. There's no editing. So any fluffs stay in, you know, they're recorded almost like theatre. But
Mm.
if you can see past that, there are some great storylines in them, and Honor was very good. I mean, Honor Blackman would have left the show anyway, even if it had moved on to film. She'd said to Pat that she felt that the storylines were beginning to leave the ground. That was her phrase.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, when you've been offered the part in, you know, in Goldfinger, you're going to go. I think they would have probably held back for her if she'd wanted to go and do Goldfinger and then come back.
Yeah.
But, you know, she'd done 2 seasons and she felt that that was enough. Same with Diana Rigg. We have to remember in the 60s, particularly if you were in a show like The Avengers, which has a kinky element to it, you got quite a lot of unwanted male attention.
Mm.
And so you've got someone like Diana who'd mostly done theatre. When you do theatre, you can walk up the high street and no one notices you. As soon
Yeah.
as you're in this, you know, huge series that's, you know, cult TV, to want a better term, um, your private life sort of has gone out the window. And a lot of that attention wouldn't be attention you might want. Um, I think people outside the industry often forget how intrusive fans
Mm.
can be.
Yeah.
You know, my dad worked on 6 shows with John Thor, and John Thor recalled going to the urinals in a restaurant. He was out for a wedding anniversary meal with his wife, and there's a guy asking him for an autograph at the urinals. You know, I mean,
Well.
you
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, some people would argue that comes with a territory, but I would argue that actually there's a time and a place for things.
Oh, yeah. You'd wait till he washes hands, wouldn't you? But
Yeah,
I suppose especially this time, time where you didn't if you get a big show or big like a Bond film now, you know it's going to be that's for life. Whereas back in these days, there wasn't so much this the you know the fandom. All this was kind of coming in with the Bonds and these kind of shows. So you, to be fair, you wouldn't necessarily know that it would kind of follow you in this kind of way.
No, but I mean, also we tend to forget because people often sort of look down on TV compared to cinema.
Mm,
These shows are being watched by a lot more than any movie
yeah.
is going to be watched. So,
Mm,
you've got someone like Peter Falk in Columbo. They reckon 1 billion people watched Columbo. 1 billion people. So, Peter Falk could go to Romania and people who knew who he was. And obviously, The Avengers is one of the first shows that sells around the world. It sells to, I think, 60 million, sorry, I think to about, sorry, 60 countries by this point. And
mm,
so the plus side, of course, is that film producers start to see you. So obviously she ends up in a Bond film, just as Honor Blackman had done. But there is a downside to fame, and TV by this point is what is leading cinema. So you look at Bond, they pick up Honor Blackman, they pick up Diana Rigg, they pick up Roger Moore. They'd have never picked up Roger Moore without the Saint. You know,
no,
and so rather than TV becoming a medium for actors who are past their movie career, it's almost this is perhaps the springboard for a movie career.
mm,
A lot of those, iconic movie actors started out in TV shows, Michael Douglas in the Streets of San Francisco, that sort of thing. TV now, by the 60s is a big thing.
mm. I think also Honor had a much better relationship with her fame than Diana Rigg did. I mean, Honor would go to lots of conventions. You could talk to her about the Avengers and Bond and everything. And I think Diana, because of course she very famously didn't go to the 50th at Chichester, despite Brian pleading for her to go. But then I think a year later she did a big convention in London, which she must have sort of had loads of. So I think she had a bit of a love-hate relationship with it, I think.
I think the thing is that a lot of you have to remember that in Honor's case, the Avengers did a huge thing for her career because Honor had always been typecast as English roses. She
Mm,
was a wife or a mother. And the Avengers comes along and it gives her this incredible kick-ass part. And of course, she inherited Ian Hendry's scripts. So she inherited male dialogue.
mm,
And this made Kathy Gale, an incredible character. And I think she was always very grateful. But, some actors are quite happy with the limelight. I wrote a book last year on Peter Falk and Patrick McGowan, and they both won Emmys on Columbo. Now, Peter Falk would go along to the Emmys award ceremonies and he'd have a really funny speech and he'd turn it almost into a like stand-up comedy. And Patrick McGowan never went to them. Not everyone wants to be on chat shows or, in front of. Um, I played John Thor's son very, very badly in an armchair theatre when I was very little. And so got to know John Thor a tiny bit. And he was a very, very private person. He wouldn't want to go on chat shows and things.
mm,
Um, the people aren't always what they appear on the television. I mean, Diana did do that lovely BFI event much later on with Dick Fiddy, and she talked and she said how grateful she was to the Avengers. But I think at the time, and it must have been very grueling making those shows. You're at Elstree from, 7:30 in the morning in makeup. You're coming
mm,
home in the dark in winter. And she's doing that for two seasons, so 3 years almost. Um, and she moved on.
mm,
Um, Dad, yeah, Dad did the same. Dad never watched an Avengers episode after he left the show
mm,
because, it's a job, and you've moved on to another job. It's
I mean, just picture Diana sort of signing Avengers stuff at that convention through gritted teeth, not wanting to do it at all. And of course, when she died, all the the obituaries always had lots of footage from the
it's normally
Avengers,
her
and
tied to the train track, isn't it, in the Gravediggers episode?
yeah,
But as
I think she would have hated that sort of just but having that kind of course she knew it would have happened, but I think some actors like to be if they find it these casts too much of a shadow, I think, on their careers in general. So it's not necessarily they have problems with these things, but they just rather like other things, perhaps to also be in people's
Well, I mean, if you
consciousness.
think about it, when you've had a very long career on stage, which was obviously her first love, film and TV, it's very boring if everyone reminds you of one particular part. I mean, Pat
Mm,
McNee didn't mind because Pat's argument was if he was on Broadway or in the West End, it was full because they were coming to see John Steed. That's what Pat always said.
well, yeah.
But Diana already had a very established career in Shakespeare and Chekhov and lots of drama. Um, and as I say, it would probably have been quite tedious for her to be constantly reminded of something that covered a very short space in her whole career. As I
Mm,
say, she did say how grateful she was later on. She said, she didn't realize how lucky she was acting against, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee and having directors like Roy Ward Baker. But, if you're in your 20s and it's one of your first television roles, you're not going to appreciate that in the way that you might do if you came to it in your 50s or or 60s.
I did briefly have a few email exchanges with writer Richard Harris, and he didn't want to do anything like we're doing now. In fact, he was quite dismissive of his work on these sort of shows, compared to his theatre and his other, creating Touch of Frost and other things like that. But he sort of alluded that Brian Clemens had a lot of say in terms of the scripts and would make changes, and it was a collaborative sort of effort. Was that true also of how Brian and Roger worked? Would
Yeah, but
Brian
you've got to remember
think
that
it?
obviously in the videotape era, Brian and Roger were just two of the main writers.
Mm,
When it comes to the season that we've just looked at an episode of, Brian is now executive producer and he's a script editor.
mm,
So it's a different relationship by this point. And obviously, Brian had a certain sort of idea of Avengerland and where he wanted it going. Now,
mm,
sometimes that might mean slightly modifying a script. Sometimes that might mean Clemensifying it, and so it was a different relationship by the time it moves into onto film. And as I say, by then it becomes, to a large extent, Brian's sort of vision of Avengerland, which is not a criticism at all. Brian Clemens in the filmed era is the most important person apart from Pat McNee.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. He wrote more scripts than anyone, and he drove the vision of where it was going. And to be honest, if it had stood still at any point, it would have ended because
Yeah.
people would have said, well, oh, God, we had all that the previous season, You've got to, you need to change things. The Avengers is always changing. Actors, it was changing from videotape to black and white film to color film, changes in style. If you've ever seen that first episode, there's only one third of it left. Hot
Hot
Snow.
Snow. Yeah.
If you look at Hot Snow and then Bizarre, the final episode, they have nothing in common apart from
Mm,
Pat McNee. You wouldn't
yeah.
know they were from the same show, would you?
Mm,
It had just constantly evolved. And I think that's one of the charms. As I said earlier, there's an Avengers out there for everyone, or
yeah.
almost everyone,
I think
depending
that's
on.
why they haven't remade it because what do you remake? Do you make it? Ian Hendry? Do you make it Honor Blackman? You know, the new Avengers. You know, it's not really a show that has a one set identity, which is probably the secret as to why we're
No,
still talking about it.
absolutely. And this is why I never understand it when people say the new Avengers. Oh, it's not like the old Avengers, you know. Well, what do you mean by that?
None of it was. None of it was the same, was it?
No, no. And it's great to see that people, you know, are still interested in the show. People are still buying the physical media, like with the new Avengers now, um, which suggests that even though all of these shows are of their time, there is a timeless charm about them.
Hmm. Oh yeah. So just to finish off, where did your dad put his Avengers work in his body of work? Where did it kind of sort of fit in that?
As in his favorite
Well, yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah, yes. Was it particularly special to
Yes,
him,
I
or
mean
it
he
was?
once said I got him to write an article after he'd retired from writing for Avengers website called the Avengers Forever, which is still out there in the
Mm,
ether somewhere. And he said on there, obviously, as a writer, your favorite shows are going to be the ones you created yourself. So there are shows where like Traveling Man in the 80s, he created and he wrote all 13 episodes. I will answer that question in a second about the movie. I
mm,
might need a stiff drink first. Um, but he said that the Avengers is right up there because by the time Honor Blackman has come on board, and she saved the show, it wouldn't have carried on if she hadn't come on board. But by that point, everyone wanted to write on the Avengers, and it was very difficult. You'd get 50 writers coming up with treatments, and the producer might take on 3 or 4 of the writers. Dad said the Avengers at its best was the most fun you could have writing. He would have done it for free. You know, that's what he said.
mm,
No, it certainly did not. That Hollywood horror of a film captured nothing of the Avengers spirit. I mean, they didn't ask Brian or Dad or anyone really for input.
mm,
They did take the rain machine idea from an Avengers script, Surfeit of H2O. But even though that writer who lives near me was alive and well, and they could have fed into him, they didn't. I think the thing is the Avengers, and we've just seen it there, and that color clip I shared earlier with you of the two of them. You
mm.
have to have chemistry between the leads,
Yeah,
and you know Rafe Fiennes and Uma Thurman. There is zero chemistry there,
yeah,
and that doesn't mean they're bad actors. You know, Fiennes has had a great career, and
yeah.
he looked the part, but there is zero chemistry between them. They might as well have been created by AI. I've got a feeling it might be Eileen Atkins in it in a tiny part, if I've got that
Yes,
wrong.
yes,
Yes.
yes, yes,
I
yes.
thought she was really good. Did she play father in it?
She no, she played one of the agents, and she has a machine gun that she fires at, I think, Eddie Izzard at one point. She
Oh,
sort of
okay.
plays
But I
sort of
thought
fighting
her
with them.
her character was called father rather than
I think it's
mother. Maybe,
Fiona Shaw who plays father.
oh, okay. Well, I mean, characters like that are quite fun.
Mm,
But I just thought the plot was unintelligible.
yeah,
It, there are some people who defend it and say if you saw the uncut version, because it was savagely cut.
yeah,
But Brian and Roger both saw the uncut version and they said it was equally bad.
right,
I
okay.
haven't seen it, so
Mm,
but no, I thought it was awful.
mm.
But then the Saint one was awful as well. Um,
I quite like that in some respects,
really?
because it's so different, and it's. I think Val Kilmer is not a bad Simon Templar.
Well,
I, I, I
he
think.
apologized to Roger after making it because he said it was so appalling, and he never watched a Saint episode
Yeah, I
before
think it was only
making the
later
film.
when he kind of had a look at things, he thought, that's how I should have done it. And I think he regretted perhaps not doing some of the research. But
I think the thing is that these shows are they capture the spirit of the age, and
mm,
I don't know that you can recapture that decades later.
No.
you can recreate a period like Foyle's War brilliantly recreates World War II home front, but I just don't think those Hollywood guys got the spirit either of the Saint or particularly the Avengers. I just think
No,
it's
there's not, there's
hideous.
something in itself, isn't it? It's not they're not attempting to recreate,
No,
and I did do a couple of chats with the director of the Avengers film and also the writer of the Avengers film. You talk to them on paper, what they wanted to do or to achieve seemed to be pretty good. It just seemed to go completely wrong when they turned over the cameras. But in some respects, they were perhaps the right people to do it. But for some reason, that wasn't enough, and it just kind of certainly wasn't made with any intention to like lot of like everything, isn't it? You don't intend to make a bad movie or a bad TV show, but
no, but you
things
need
happen.
people involved in the project who understand the spirit of it.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, someone has just put up there, Return of a Saint was good.
Mm.
Yes, because people who were involved in the original were involved in it.
Yeah.
And again, with the new Avengers, I said at that box set launch the other day that I think they got the balance right. One head looking back at the 60s Avengers,
Mhm.
and one head aware that we're now in the gritty mid 70s, and we need to reference that a bit as well.
Mm.
I mean, Brian Clements could have been hired to help or advise on that movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or most of the Avengers writers were still alive and could have done that. But I do remember my mum and dad going to the premiere up in London. They'd been invited,
Mm.
and they came out, and dad was horrified. Even though he'd left the Avengers project years before, he just felt it was a bit sort of sacrilegious that it sort of,
Yeah.
that it, you know, as I say, I mean, I think it's very, very hard to come to something many decades later, and if you're not including people who've worked on the original to
Yeah.
sort of get that lightning in a bottle again. I mean, I didn't even like the Randall and Hopkirk deceased when it was rebooted, um, sort of a decade or 2 decades or whatever it was later.
I think the
Um,
problem with that was that the Charles Higson who did it, he liked the concept, but he didn't really like the original show. But he thought it was a really good, which it is. Admittedly, it is a very good idea, isn't it? Having but he was more taken with that, I suppose, than some of the original show, and I think that's kind of what. Yes, of course, it never saw
but
light of day, did it? Professionals reboot. Well, I
but
know that Brian was working on a film, wasn't he? I think.
well, I mean, called yeah, it did come back as a rebooted series with Edward Woodward as the sort of new head. But
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
uh,
six
I
episodes
don't
or
think
so.
that was
Mm.
I don't think that was great. But I mean, that's quite an ego thinking you're going to improve on Randall and Hobkirk, the original, because you had Mike Pratt and Kenneth Cope. So you've got a
Yeah.
great comic actor and Mike Pratt, who was, brilliant musician, good actor. You got, Edward Astley's brilliant score.
Mm.
Um, if you think you're going to improve on that, good luck with that.
I just think it wasn't even that. I think it was just I like that. Let's take that and do my own thing of it. I don't think it wasn't
But then why
disrespectful.
why call it Randall and Hopkirk?
Exactly. Yeah. It's
You know,
easy.
you
It's a bit
you could
odd.
take the idea of a ghostly detective helping his. You're not going to
Yeah.
get sued because you can make it different enough. But calling it Randall and Hopkirk, but saying you didn't actually like the original show
I couldn't believe it
is a
when I
bit.
asked him because he said I didn't like the original show. So that's kind of a counterintuitive kind of approach to it really. But I thought that was a very odd thing for him to say. But
I
there
think
we go.
it's one of those 60s shows that is still fun to watch. Some shows you do go back to and you think,
Mm.
oh, well, that was probably quite good in the 60s or in the
Yeah.
70s or whatever, but it hasn't stood the test of time. No, I think Rendell and Hopkirk still got quite a lot of charm, but a lot of that is those three actors, including the lovely Annette Andre, who are great in the main parts.
I mean, I've been rewatching quite a few of those because me and Annette are trying to do another episode, but to actually find an episode where she's central to the story and is in it a lot, it's quite
Mm.
difficult. And I've had to rewatch pretty much the entire show. So comparison to what we've seen in compare it to what we see in Silent Dust, where they're both there all the time, and sometimes Annette's at the beginning, and then that's it, or so it's very very different in terms of the role of women as we've kind of already sort of
Yeah.
touched
Well, I
on.
mean, she, as she said on your Mandrake your Mandrake watch along, she would have liked to have had the Emma Peel part. She'd
Yeah,
have
trying to
loved a
run
role like
people around
that.
the shoulder and stuff. Yeah.
I mean, the problem with Randall and Hopkirk, if you're an actress, is that she can't see one of the two co-leads. Her
Mm.
character can't, and so it's going to be driven by Mike Pratt because he's the only person who can communicate with both of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, she did say that had there been a second season, the idea was that she would have got involved in some of the cases more. That's what her co-actors wanted. But of
Mm.
course, in those days, ITC shows tended to run for one series and then they moved on to a different show, apart from the same.
Is that an intentional thing just to kind of
Yeah,
want to do? Yeah, because you would
yeah,
have
it
thought a lot
was.
of them would be very successful, but their pickup rate was very very low.
Yeah, I mean, it became like a production line. So, you do Department S for one season, Randall and Hopkirk, Champions, and then, you move on to, you know, something else.
Mm.
But no, the Avengers ladies were fortunate in that those parts had a bit of everything.
Mm.
You could be fashionable, but at the same time, you could um, be very much literally hands-on.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
And how did you know how your dad rated this particular episode in amongst his Avengers scripts?
he liked this episode. I mean, his favorite ones were um, Mandrake, which you've covered before, Dial a Deadly Number, which is very much a studio bound one, uh, around banking and wine tasting and wine duels. The Hour That Never Was, and Silent Dust would probably have been part of that sort of top four for him. And it's a fun episode, isn't it? You've got so much location shooting on that, and whether it's like the surreal sheriff or the actual fox hunting bits, you've got a great villain. It's well cast, nicely directed. There's nothing to sort of for a writer really to complain about there. Really, I think they did a great job with that. I mean, obviously, when they moved into color, he only did two color episodes, and one of those was a recycled Honor Blackman one because they recycled quite a lot of the Honor Blackman ones in the color rig season.
And looking at it now, is there any particular moments that you particularly enjoy as a viewer or that that your dad would have particularly kind of proud of
Well, I mean,
of
he loved that the rowing scene, the boating scene at the beginning, and Emma Peel's saying, Steed says, tired, exhausted, no stamina, no comment. He loved little bits like that where you get a really witty bit of dialogue.
Mm.
And he loved what Aubrey Morris did with Quince, the sort of bird watcher. Those sort
Mm.
of characters are very, very Avengerish. But no, I think there were one or two episodes he wrote that when I was an adult and I had the DVDs, he refused to rewatch because they'd either been changed or he wasn't happy with them. But
Mm.
Silent Dust, he was always happy to rewatch, and he'd laugh at his own jokes on them.
Well, there was a lot of good humor in this, and a little thing like having the fertilizers that smell like peach melba, and the bit with the horse just doesn't want to stop drinking, and Steve
Yeah,
saying, "Well, it hasn't aren't like that." Those kind of things are very
yeah.
good. Um, and you got the
I think
Princess
there was
Menace
more,
and
yeah, there was more room at this point in the show for that sort of witty repartee, because that's one of the things you were concentrating on. You weren't concentrating on fabulous, colourful sets and fashion items and things. It was a little bit more um, about verbal humour rather than visual colour, that sort of thing. But
yeah. I mean, I think it's one of my favorite episodes of the show. Would you say it's one of yours as well?
yeah, it would make my top 10. It wouldn't make my top three. Probably top three black and whites would be The House that Jack Built,
Yeah,
one of Brian Clemens's. The Hour That Never Was, because it's so daring, just having the two of them on 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 screen for half an hour without another single actor. That's really very daring. You've got to
yeah,
trust your two leads to do that. And maybe a touch of Brimstone, which is obviously quite a um, yes, thank you for that comment about Hour That Never Was. I mean, that was the episode. If you've got the DVD or if you've got the Blu-ray version, there's a nice commentary by Jerry O'Hara, who directed The Hour That Never Was. And he says that Pat said that in America, when they started screening this season, the ratings weren't very good, and they put on The Hour That Never Was because they thought they put it on ahead of where it should have been, because they felt it was a very sort of strong storyline. And people always remember the milk float, because you
yeah.
hear the whining of the milk float, but you don't see it for quite a long time in the episode. So that would probably be his favorite filmed one. It was the one he always got asked about.
Oh yeah, and it's say the way it builds, and say with two leads that could pretty much doing not much happening in the first half. To
Oh.
keep that for it not to get boring, I think you have to be quite talented to be able to sort of do that. I will
And
read out the
again,
comment.
probably partly because it was on film.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Because obviously, I think recreating that on sets, I don't think you could have done it. I think, like Silent Dust, they're two episodes you couldn't have made in the studio.
oh yeah, yeah. They're very much of the film era, aren't they? So it's
Yeah.
very much so. I will read out that comment because people watching it won't be able to see it, obviously. So so that the hour it never was his personal favorite. Great writing. Hats off to your dad. Always good to see some Steed or Peel backstory in an episode. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, that was based partly on a real World War II hero who my dad had met many years later when he was doing national service. And he used to do flying missions over the channel at dark. And he'd be landing in France, not knowing whether the torchlight was from French resistance or from a Nazi. And this guy, I'm ashamed to say I can't remember his name, but he was a real life war hero. And so Steed's backstory for The Hour That Never was based on this real war hero who would do these flying missions. So there was a sort of a serious side, even though obviously in The Hour That Never Was, all Steed wants to talk about is, the fact that you've got a terrible hangover as you're coming into the airbase, etc. All of these stories always had a real starting point.
mm,
Something either that you've experienced as a writer or that you've read about, like as I say, Silent Dust with Silent Spring. You need a springboard, as a starting point.
and my last question. Did your dad have a particular way of making character names? Were you taking from the phone book? Would he kind of, or was it just something
Well,
that
no, I mean, well,
naturally he did?
for example, if you look at the characters' names in this particular episode, Juggins, well, he's always got a jug of cider on the go, hasn't he?
Mm,
Quince is one of the comic characters in Midsummer Night's Dream.
yeah.
Mellors is the gardener in Lady Chatterley's Lover. So they've often come from somewhere. I mean, in fact, the Steed makes a joke. He says, Mellors, what, the Mellors in that episode, So the characters' names are often in that sort of Dickens style of coming up with a name that suits the character, if you can,
Hmm.
So
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, it's probably a lovely place to end it. Thank you, Rodney, for spending some time this evening going through this episode.
no, no, pleasure, Philip. Thank you very much.
So
Cheers.
obviously we'll speak again. We'll do new Avengers later in the year. But yeah,
Oh,
it's really
as soon as you got your super duper copy through.
I'm not sure if it will turn up before we. I might be left with the old DVD, but hopefully not. But,
Okay. All right. Well, thanks to anyone who watched along.
well, yeah, we've got some people watching, and yeah, thank you very much, everybody that has stayed with us, and thank you, Rodney, for a wonderful chat. It's been really entertaining.
No, pleasure.
Okay, well, take care, have a good week, and I'll see you soon. So, well, thank you very much, guys, for watching. You may be interested to pick up this. This is the Avengers official quiz book by Roy Bettridge. Roy very kindly sent me a copy of this, just on the condition that I plug it to my Avengers content. So I'm doing my bit by mentioning it now. It is available on quotemedia.co.uk. That's QUOUIT and media.co.uk. It covers the new Avengers as well. Quite a fun little book, and probably quite a good little thing for Christmas time as well. So thank you very much. Have a good week, and hope to see you again. Thanks. Bye.